I'd like to welcome each and every individual to Voices of Integrity podcast for young men. And today we're going to talk about a number of different things, but one of these things is going to be confidence. But before we get started with that, let's talk about, caring. So a lot of times we use our words as men. We use our words rather than our do. We say care versus do care. And so, like after you go through this podcast, as a reflex, do you think about, okay, what other guys would benefit from this? Do you actually share it with other people, or do you just like, oh, that's a nice podcast? I mean, do you do anything with it? Now, my my belief is that we gain confidence by men by doing. It's not It's not talking that gives us
Mhm.
confidence. You can tell young men that have confidence. You can tell the ones that tend to talk a lot about themselves and about how amazing they are, and they lift themselves up and they push other people down. They have, low self confidence. Why do they have low self confidence? They have low self confidence, it seems, like because they're not doing things, they're talking about things. And so we'll go drill deeper into the amiable personality. At some point, we'll talk about mental health and the different personalities. But today we're going to be going deeper into confidence, and we'll be starting off with the amiable personality. We've covered podcasts in the past about that, but we're going to go deeper now. So the amiable personality and confidence is, one of their greatest strengths, as we've learned, is their concern, compassion for people. One of their weaknesses is their concern, compassion for people. If they're an amiable, analytic personality, their concern, compassion for people is a strength, and then weakness, and then their secondary is their analytic. So one of their strengths is they like to dot their I's, cross their T's, make sure things are done properly in order. The combination of these two personalities is a very interesting. It's what my dad was, a very powerful man, very, very different than me. So I was analytic or I was driver analytic. And so will we bleed into or delve into our relationships with our dad? It seems to me that there is a natural propensity for men to um, want to impress their dads, please their dads, make their dads happy. I remember my dad, and I never really saw him get angry, out of control, yell, never swore. I mean, he's a pastor, but he never swore. I mean, this guy, he's a good dad. But it's weird because another friend of mine, I was sharing some of my childhood, and he says, your dad was more abusive to you than my dad was to me. And I don't look at my dad as being abusive. I don't. But the analytic amiable is they really super stubborn and locked. Like they get their mind set on something, they do it, and they have a lot of data to back it up. Super, super arrogant too. They think they know how to. They think they know so much about people. Like they think, I know how to treat people. And well, how is that? Well, it's the way I'm treating them. Like that's the best way to treat them. It's like, okay. If you're a man and married and have kids, your wife likely is going to be, if you're an amiable analytic, your wife might be driver expressive or expressive driver. And so your wife is going to be like, you're going to be the good cop, likely. You're going to like often like be nice to your kids, and you're going to think, well, I'm a good dad because my kids love me. No, your kids, you think your kids love you because because you don't discipline, you don't make them, you let them do what they want to do. And they like you, not because you're a good dad. And so you're going to get frustrated later in life, because what's going to happen is they're not going to respect you. If you're an amiable driver personality, this is where passive aggressive comes in. You're passive, but then you can be aggressive. Passive aggressive gets a bad rap. It just does. I've had 6 people in my life tell me I was passive aggressive every time. I'm like, high five. That's awesome. I'm changing. Most people just say I'm aggressive. And so passive aggressive is not necessarily bad. It's not necessarily wrong. But it's very different. So there's going to be a lot of inner conflict when you cross over primary and secondary. When you cross over, so you're going to see people's potential, and you're going to want to push people, but then you're going to want to nurture people. So you might run somebody over, apologize for running them over, and then run them over again. The amiable, expressive personality, you're going to have a double portion of people. So you're going to be really nice and concerned. You don't like conflict, supportive, and you're going to be fun. And so you're going to be, you're going to be a fun, loving dad, fun loving man. So you joke and you goof around, and you're nice, but you're going to have a hard time getting tasks done. And so I think self-confidence comes from doing things. And it's often by doing things you don't like doing and you're maybe not good at. If we do things that we're good at, that's kind of how society will do the things you're good at. Well, I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying that, like, like when I was 23, 24, actually I was 27. It was 27. I went through the, Linda Breakhall's 3-day, speakers, intensive training. And at the end of day 1, she said, Mark, I have to be honest with you. You're the most god awful speaker I've ever, experienced. I just responded. I said, wow, that's great. I have no place to go but up. She laughed and she says, you're just a masochist. Like, to me, like we talked, I think in one of the other podcasts, about where you get your confidence from, your self-confidence comes from. And so to me, if we're not getting our self-confidence coming from the core, our creator who created us, what we're created to do, if we're not doing that, well, we're going to run into self-confidence issue. Be disciplined, be consistent, be disciplined, seek to do the right thing. Don't seek to make people happy, seek to do the right thing. Like, my job for my wife is not to make her happy. 39 years of marriage. My job for my 7 kids and 8 grandchildren, another one, is not to make them happy. It's to do the right thing. And so sometimes they don't like grandpa, and that's okay. So, Kenny, thoughts, questions, anything you might have on this?
So I know one person comes to mind, but I know a few people that they really struggle with self-confidence. Like, I've noticed, and even having a conversation with them, they don't make eye contact with you. And they just seem to have very little self-confidence, if any. And I'm just curious how would you best help somebody like that and able to get them to see their self-confidence, or get them to have more self-confidence?
Yeah, great question. So a couple of things. Personally, when you shake somebody's hand, you have a good, strong handshake. Maybe it's old school. I don't know. To me, you don't want a limp handshake. You want a strong handshake. When you look at people in the eyes, I think that a lot of times, like, you can have confidence and not look like you have confidence. You can, not look like you have confidence and be confident. But I think a lot of times you act confident and then you become confident. And so when you look somebody's in the eyes, if you not willing to look them in the eyes, people will perceive that you lack confidence.
Right.
If you're not willing to acknowledge that you're wrong, people are going to treat you, people are going to treat you in a different way. And if people treat you, so, being confident, acting confident, doing the things that require strong handshake, look in the eyes, being willing to go ahead and accept mistake, those type of things, then you gain confidence from those behavior. Faking confidence, talking about yourself. If you get angry and upset when somebody disagrees with you, if you get angry or upset, when somebody goes ahead and corrects you, you know what? You're a weak man. You just are. I mean, acknowledge it and change. So, Mel and Luke, if either of you guys have any thoughts on these things, you can feel free to jump in and interrupt at any time for sure. So, does that help some, Kenny?
And would it be weird to address that with the person?
Well, when you say weird, I don't know what that means. And so, I think being wise, I think that's important. I think being wise and, I think you can ask the person, you can say, hey, there might be something that I don't know, that there might be something that I could say, but I'm not sure how you'll take it. So I'm not sure if I should say it. So you can put morphine in before you go ahead and do the surgery, or you can just rip off the Band-Aid.
Right.
And just go ahead and say, you can ask people for input into your life. And when you accept their input, they're more likely to feel a sense of responsibility to get input from you. So I've been thinking, I participated in this, this podcast for young men, and they had this interesting podcast about, confidence. And so I was wondering, do you think that I come across as confident? I mean, it was interesting at that meeting we were at with that accounting, with the accounting. And I said something about, yeah, I don't have confidence. And they both started laughing. And they both, and the guy said, and he was 10 years older than I am. And he says, oh, really? He says, you come across like seems like you don't have a shred of not having confidence. Like, I can't even imagine you not having confidence. And so I think, a confident person will say, hey, I lack confidence. They just will. Or like, if you're, so the self-deprecating, humor to be able to say it, to look at it and say, so I don't think so. I mean, my first response as a driver, is no, go for it. What do you have to lose?
Right.
But that's a driver. So it's like, well, Mark, how somebody does it, that is also important. My son, Ben, when he was probably 12 or so, he was on cross country. And the night before, he comes running up to me at the house, and he's like, Dad, where are those laminated cards on personalities? I said, they're in the room on the back of the door. He runs and gets them. I'm like, that's kind of weird, but whatever. So the next day, we're at the track meet. He comes up and he's like, Dad, can you help me out? I'm like, yeah, sure, buddy. What's going on? And he says, I gave those cards to my friend. I said, oh, great. And he says, it didn't work, though. I'm like, what do you mean it didn't work? He said, well, they're all ticked at me. I'm like, they're ticked at you? Like, why? It's like, I don't know, Dad. I did exactly what you did, and they're all upset with me. Can you make it better? I'm like, yeah, that's not a problem. I can do that. Like, I'm just curious, when you say you did what I did, what did you do? He says, well, I asked him the different shapes, and I asked him the different, the different things that cause frustration. I said, okay. And he said, then I told him their weaknesses. No, no. No, you can't do that, buddy. You got to tell them their strengths first. So one of your greatest strengths is your drive, your assertiveness, you make things happen. One of your weaknesses is, your drive, your assertiveness, you make things happen. You got to give them the strengths. Oh, that makes a lot of sense to him. Like, right? He just whacked him in the face with a weakness. And so it was funny because he brought, 2 or 3 of his friends over, and I did what I did, and they're all like, wow, that is so cool, Mr. Boersma. And then they ran and got, other friends, and they said, brought them back, and this is at the track meet. And before I know it, I have like 20, 30 people around me, kids, like middle schoolers. And then naturally, after you get 20, 30 young people around you, young kids, what's going to happen? Their moms are going to come. So there's this inner parameter of young kids. Then there's all these moms that are around me. It's just kind of weird, kind of interesting. And so I think having an understanding, having them, if you go ahead and, give them this podcast too, and then have a conversation. Like I think that there's men actually that think they're really confident. Like it's funny when I'm having a conversation, I perceive that a man might not have confidence. Usually it's men, it could be women, but a lot of times, most of the time it's men. Like I perceive they don't have confidence. I'll say 1 to 10, you know, one to 10, how confident, do you think you are? And they'll say, 9. I said, okay, interesting. Like David Hancock with Morgan James Publishing out of New York. You met him. You and I met him, Kenny, and nice guy. He introduced me to Michael Cogdill. I think is out of South Carolina, and this guy, has won like 25, 24 Emmy awards. Like he's on TV and everything. And we have 2 short conversations, about a half an hour each. At the end of the second half, second conversation, he says, "Mark, you're an executive coach, right? You do executive coaching?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "So you're a pretty good read of people." I'm like, "Well, I don't know, maybe, I don't know, I guess." He says, "What do you think of me?" And I paused like I just did. And I said, "Well, Michael, let me explain something to you first." He said, 1 to 10, like, how direct would you like me to be with you? And he's like, oh, yeah, give me a 12. I'm like, well, let me explain something to you. My 2 often feels like a 22. It's pretty, I'm pretty intense. He's like, he starts laughing. A super nice guy, friends to this day. he starts he starts laughing. He's like, "Mark, Mark, Mark." I'm like, "This guy's going down. He's going down hard." So it's always cool when the testosterone kicks into the men. He says, "Mark, I'm in TV. Like you can't tell me something, somebody hasn't told me." I said, "Really, Michael?" He's like, "Yeah." I said, "Well, Michael, has anybody ever, said that you lack confidence?" Dead silence on the phone. He's like, "No." He's like, "You think I lack confidence?" I'm like, "Well, on the last 2 conversation, here's the 5 things listed off, all 5 of them." He's like, "Holy cow, are you good?" And so, you know, um, it's interesting. It's interesting. Mel, questions or thoughts you have?
Uh, just this is I just love the simplicity of this system.
Right. I mean, I've been teaching it, learning it for over, 30 years, maybe 33, 35 years. And it's so easy, but yet it's so complex. I mean, there's 4
Yeah.
major personalities, 16, 264, 256, 65,536. So it is really simple, but it's really complex too. I mean, it's like, and both, like the more it's just like with women, the more you know about women, the more you know you don't know, you know,
Yeah.
with a wife, 4 daughters, 5 granddaughters. It's like, it's complicated. I mean, it's complicated. Anything else, Mel, you got?
Nope, not right now.
Luke, how about you?
So, if I gain confidence in something, can you hear me?
Yep.
So, if I gain confidence in something, how, when does it turn from confidence to being cocky?
When you don't understand, the more you know you don't know. It's the understanding of dimensional, so it's the understanding of dimensional thinking. So what's a higher number? So what's a higher number, a 2 or a 5, or a 2 or a 9? Most people will say, well, of course a 9 is. But that's because they don't understand dimensions. They don't understand dimensional thinking. And so, a 9 is higher if we're in the one dimension we're in. We think we know a lot. Like the Calvins and the Hobbes comic, he comes home. I love that little smart aleck. He comes home. It's like, Mom, like he's in kindergarten. And he's like, Mom, I'm done with school. She's like, Calvin, why do you say that? He's like, well, I learned everything I need to learn today. And so when you look at dimensional thinking and understanding dimensions, so what's the higher number, a 2 or a 9? Well, if you're talking one dimension, a 9, but there's not one dimension, there's multiple dimensions. Once you hit a 10 is not perfection. A 10 is masteries of that dimension. Once you hit a 10, you move to the next dimension. A 2 in the next dimension is higher than a 9 in the previous dimension. What's weird about this is when I was blessed to discover it, it came from humility. I was talking to a guy about how coachable he was. He says, oh, I'm a 10. And I'm thinking he is not a 10. He's resistant. He's like a 2. And so I'm processing this and I'm like, he's not. He's a 2. The guy's a 2. And then afterwards I'm thinking, what if he's right? I'm like, he's not. The guy's not. He's egotistical, self-centered there. And I'm like, but what if he is, Mark? So the ability to take one's mind and go places that, it's like, I know he wasn't confident. I know that he wasn't coachable. But I'm like, well, what if he's right? Well, what if we're both right? I mean, you can't be both right. Like, what if you are? And that's when we discovered this. And so, understanding, the next dimension principle is really key, because what it does is it keeps you humble. So when you break through to a new dimension in coaching, whether it's personal or professional coaching, it's very important to understand this. So when you break through to a new dimension, you need a cheerleader. You need somebody to say, hey, you're amazing. That's crazy. Way to go. Why do you need a cheerleader? Because when you break through to a new dimension, you feel inferior, feel terrible. I'll never forget, it was when I was 42 years old. And I walked in. I was just talking to my wife about this when we were on a walk yesterday. And I walked in to, so we had 22 employees at the time. And I walked in and I went ahead and said to the team, I said, hey guys, I just want to share something. I've never been more confident that I'm going to be wrong, that I don't know what I'm doing. That's not the, top way to go ahead and, instill confidence in your team. When the leader of the team says, hey, I've never been so confident that I'm wrong. And I let it sit in. And then I said, but I also want to share, I've never been so confident I'll see it quickly and fix it. So it's that tension that comes back and forth, so that the cheerleader naturally is an encourager. When you break through to a new dimension, yes, you messed up. Yep. And it's okay. So you need that cheerleader energy. And then you have the analytic, which is next. And so what you need there is, well, you're in a new dimension, buddy. You're in a new dimension, sweetheart. Let me explain how this dimension works. So every time you make a breakthrough to a new dimension, there's a different set of rules. And if you don't understand those new rules in that dimension, like my international speaking coach, Linda Brakell, she said, this is with relationships too. I'm like, what does that mean? She says, so my wife and I, it was love at first sight, but, there's stuff. And so she was dating another guy, and there was, and I'm like, okay. And So there's a certain set of rules. And then we became really close friends. And now the rules changed. And then we started dating and the rules changed. And then we got engaged and the rules changed. And then we got married and the rules changed. And then we had kids and the rules changed. And then we had, we had teenagers and the rules changed. And then we became empty nesters and the rules changed. So every time you go into a new dimension in life, a new season in life, the rules change. And if you don't understand the new rules, you're going to slide back down. It's called a fractal, where it's a pattern. Anyways, so the teacher will come in and say, let me explain this to you and how it works. Because if the teacher doesn't explain how it works in this new dimension, and so Kenny, a couple years ago, I explained to him the rules of dating and how these and how these rules, and he listened to me. Like most young men don't. Most men don't. I'm just saying, this is how it works, guys. You can honor this or not honor. It's your call, but I'm just telling you, this is how it works. And then you have level 3, which is the expressive. You have level 3, and this is the expressive. And this is where, it's like a coach. They'll bench you, they'll kick your butt. Like they get aggressive, but they can be fun and funny. And then the next level 4, is the Navy SEAL. It's the driver personality. And so you'll never hear a Navy SEAL or top Olympian, ever hear him say, nobody's perfect. You will never hear a top level person say that. Never. They don't. It's not in how they think. Like they don't think in terms of, well, nobody's perfect. They just don't. Top level people, they expect perfection. Actually, it's not. They expect flawlessness. Flawlessness is not perfection. Flawless is being less flawed. So it's less flawed. Like I'm expecting more of myself than my wife could ever expect of me. My wife, I expect so much of myself. It's unbelievable. My kids, I expect so much from myself than my kids ever could from me. My grandkids, other people around me. How do you know if you're not at that level? It's when you get defensive when somebody says, Mark, you're a pathetic husband. I'm like, no kidding. Mark, you are a pathetic father. Yep, I get it. Mark, you're a pathetic grandfather. Let me tell you, I get it. Mark, you're terrible at business. Yep, I understand that. And so, and it's not just not accepting it verbally, but not like I've internalized it. So we're going to have a part 2 on this one, I think, because there's so much more here. Like it's crazy. It's just crazy. And then it goes into the 4 levels of learning. And then it goes into the blackout principle. Like when men stop talking to me, I'm like, really? Like I get it when my granddaughters go ahead and are ticked at grandpa because grandpa said something they didn't like to hear. I'm not talking to you, grandpa, anymore. Okay. But they will. They will. And the women in my life, they will too. When men go ahead and do this, my heart breaks for these men. I just think, I just hurt for them. I'm like, so make sure we share this, pass this along. We'll pick it up again on the next podcast for sure, because there's so much depth here. If you have any questions, connect with the individual who invited you to participate in today's session, or you can call toll free at 888-230-2300. That's 888-230-2300. If you're calling in outside the U.S., call the U.S. base number is 630-393-9909. And always remember, we can accomplish so much more together than we ever could on our own. Have an amazing day. Don't forget to share. Bye.